You did everything right. You went to therapy. You journaled. You faced the parts of yourself you'd been running from for years. You processed the trauma, integrated the shadow, healed the wounds. And now, you feel nothing. Not the peaceful nothing. The terrifying nothing. The kind where you wake up and can't remember why anything mattered. The worst part isn't the emptiness. It's that you can't explain it to anyone. How do you tell people you felt more alive when you were broken? How do you admit that healing somehow left you feeling more lost than the suffering ever did? You scroll through motivational quotes that used to inspire you. Nothing. You look at your goals, the ones that used to excite you. Nothing. You try to force yourself to care about your career, your relationships, your future. Still nothing. And deep down, in a place, you're terrified to acknowledge you're starting to wonder. Was I better off before I started this healing journey? Here's what nobody prepared you for. What if this silence isn't the sound of something dying? What if it's the sound of something being born? Carl Jung spent his entire life studying a pattern that terrified his patients. The people who did the deepest healing work, who faced their shadow and integrated those rejected parts of themselves, often felt worse before they felt better. Not slightly worse. Fundamentally unmotivated, empty, lost. He wrote something that most therapists still don't understand. The collapse of the persona is often mistaken for depression. He knew something modern psychology keeps missing. When you've done real shadow work, when you've excavated your unconscious and faced what lives there, your entire motivational system doesn't just shift. It disintegrates. And that disintegration, it's not pathology. It's transformation. Think about it. For years, maybe decades, you were motivated by unconscious forces. The need to be loved, the fear of abandonment, the drive to prove your worth, the terror of not being enough. These weren't conscious choices. They were survival mechanisms running in the background of your psyche, pushing you forward, keeping you busy, making you productive. But shadow work doesn't just heal these wounds. It exposes the entire machinery. Suddenly you can see how much of your life was driven by fear wearing the mask of ambition. How much of your motivation was actually just avoiding pain dressed up as pursuing success. How much of your productivity was anxiety in a business suit. When that machinery stops working, when those unconscious drivers no longer drive you, you don't just lose motivation. You lose the only reasons you've ever had to be motivated. In the next 50 minutes, I'm going to show you why losing your motivation after shadow work isn't a sign you failed. It's proof something profound is happening. You'll understand the 3 stages of psychological collapse that happen after facing the Carl Jung shadow stages he identified but rarely explained clearly. And you'll learn how to recognize when new authentic motivation is beginning to emerge, even when it feels like absolutely nothing is happening. By the end, you'll realize you're not broken. You're between worlds. And that's exactly where transformation lives. Let me speak directly to 3 different versions of you because this void hits differently depending on who you are and what you've been carrying. If you're a woman who spent decades being the caretaker, the mediator, the one who held everything together, shadow work showed you something devastating. You saw how much of your identity was built on managing other people's emotions. How much of your worth was tied to being needed? How much of your life force was spent making sure everyone else was okay? Now that you've stopped, the person in the mirror is a stranger. You healed your people-pleasing. You set boundaries. You stopped abandoning yourself for others. But now you don't know who you are when you're not needed. The motivation that drove you for 20 years, that got you up in the morning, that made you feel valuable, it was all fear. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of being too much or not enough. Fear of abandonment if you ever said no. That fear is gone now. The healing journey worked. But the engine that ran your entire life, it stopped, and nothing has replaced it yet. If you're a man who finally admitted the stoic mask was crushing you, who finally cried for the first time in years, who finally acknowledged the wounds your father left, you did the bravest thing. You faced what you were taught real men never face. You broke the generational pattern. You chose healing over hardness. But now the drive that came from "I'll show them" is gone. The angry fuel that powered your career, that made you work 60-hour weeks, that pushed you to achieve things you never thought possible, that came from somewhere deep and wounded. The need to prove you're not weak. The hunger to earn respect you never got as a child. The desperate hope that if you just achieve enough, someone will finally see you. Carl Jung's shadow integration dissolved that wound. Now you're sitting in your office staring at promotions that suddenly feel meaningless. Everyone expects you to keep performing, but you can't find the fire anymore. And you're starting to wonder if you've lost your edge, if you've somehow made yourself soft, if healing was actually a mistake. If you're younger, if you've deconstructed the comparison trap in your 20s or early 30s, if you've healed your attachment wounds and stopped chasing the life Instagram told you to want, you've done in your youth what most people avoid their entire lives. But now you're looking at your career path, your relationship, your goals, and realizing they were never yours. They were downloaded, inherited, copied from people who seem to have it figured out. You don't know what you actually want because you've never asked. You've been too busy performing the life you thought you were supposed to want. No motivation, no drive, no clarity. Just this empty space where your borrowed dreams used to live. Here's what ties all three of you together. You're feeling the same thing Jung recognized in his own patients over and over again. We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. Every version of the false self, every mask you wore, every performance you gave, they were all you. But they weren't the whole truth. Shadow work stripped away the disguises. And now you're standing there, finally seeing yourself clearly, but having no idea what to do with what you see. So let me explain exactly what happened to your motivational system and why it collapsed. For years you were motivated by unconscious forces. These weren't things you chose. They were survival mechanisms installed in childhood running in the background like software you never agreed to download. The need to be loved, the fear of abandonment, the drive to prove your worth, the terror of not being enough. Maybe your mother's love felt conditional, so you learned to achieve to earn affection. Maybe your father was absent, so you learned to perform to get attention. Maybe you were bullied, so you learned to be perfect to avoid rejection. Maybe your family was chaotic, so you learned to control everything to feel safe. These patterns became your operating system. They weren't conscious. You didn't wake up every day and think, I'm going to work myself to exhaustion because I'm trying to earn love I never got as a child. You just worked. You just achieved. You just performed. And you thought that drive, that hunger, that endless pushing was just who you were. But shadow work, real shadow work, doesn't just heal wounds. It exposes the entire machinery. It shows you how much of your life was driven by compensation, by trying to outrun pain, by attempting to prove you're worthy of the love and belonging you should have received freely. Suddenly, you can see it all. How much of your ambition was actually fear? How much of your motivation was just avoiding the feeling of not being enough? How much of your productivity was a sophisticated form of running away from yourself? The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. Jung understood this deeply. Your specific wounds created your specific compensations. Your unique pain built your unique defenses. And now that the pain is healing, the defenses are collapsing. When that machinery stops working, when those unconscious drivers are no longer driving you, you experience something that feels like death. You don't just lose motivation. You lose the only framework you've ever had for understanding why anything matters. This is what Jung called the necessary dissolution before rebirth. The old self, the performed self, the self that was built to survive your childhood, that self has to die before your true self can emerge. But nobody prepares you for how quiet it feels in the space between who you were and who you're becoming. Let me tell you about the persona, because understanding what's dying is the first step to trusting what's being born. Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to fit into society, the character we perform to get our needs met. It's not fake exactly. It's not malicious. It's just not the whole truth. Your persona was the ambitious professional, or the selfless mother, or the strong man who never breaks, or the cool, unbothered one who has it all together. That persona wasn't random. It was precisely designed by your unconscious to protect you and help you belong. If you were hurt by being too emotional as a child, you built a persona of rationality and control. If you were abandoned for having needs, you built a persona of complete self-sufficiency. If you were criticized for taking up space, you built a persona of smallness and agreeableness. Shadow work strips away the persona. It reveals the gap between your authentic self and the self you've been performing. And once you see that gap, once you understand how much of your life has been a performance, you can't unsee it. The problem is this: your entire life was organized around that performed self. Your career was chosen to satisfy the persona. Your relationships were built to support the mask. Your goals were designed to prove the character you were playing was worthy. Your entire sense of purpose was constructed around becoming a more convincing version of someone you're not. So what happens when that version of you dies, but you haven't yet discovered who you really are underneath? You feel unmotivated. Not because you're depressed, though it might look like that from the outside. Not because you're lazy, though you might fear that about yourself. But because motivation, real motivation, lasting motivation, can only come from truth. And the truth is still emerging from the ruins of who you thought you had to be. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. Jung wrote this because he'd seen it countless times. The dissolution looks like falling apart. It feels like everything is ending. But there's an intelligence to this process. Your psyche knows exactly what it's doing. It's protecting you from building another life on false foundations. It's refusing to let you go back to performing. It's creating the conditions for something real to finally emerge. But right now, in the middle of it, you can't see the order. You can only feel the chaos. And that's exactly why you need to understand what comes next. Jung was obsessed with medieval alchemy. Not because he believed you could turn lead into gold, but because he recognized it as a perfect psychological map. The alchemists described transformation in stages. The first stage was called nigredo, the blackening, the death phase. Everything had to die, turn black, rot, decompose, dissolve into nothing, before anything new could be born. This is where you are. In the necessary darkness, the void, the dissolution that must happen before new life can emerge. This is the nigredo phase of your spiritual awakening, and it's not optional. But here's what makes this so confusing, so terrifying in our culture. We've been taught that healing should feel good, that growth should be linear, that progress should be measurable. We expect shadow work to work like taking medicine. You feel sick, you take the pill, you feel better. Instead, it works like surgery. The procedure is successful. The healing is real. But the recovery is long, strange, and nothing like what you expected. During this phase, you might find yourself unable to care about things that used to matter deeply. Career goals that once seemed vital now feel arbitrary. Why does any of this matter? Relationships that once excited you might feel performative. Are we really connecting or just playing roles? Hobbies that used to bring joy might feel forced. Who was I even doing this for? This isn't clinical depression. You're not hopeless. You're not worthless. You're not unable to function. You're just not motivated by the same things anymore. And without those familiar carrots and sticks, without the fear pushing you and the approval pulling you, you don't know how to move. Jung understood this as a sign that your psyche is undergoing fundamental reorganization. The ego, your sense of separate self, your performed identity, it's no longer in the driver's seat. But the self, your deeper, more authentic essence, hasn't fully emerged yet. You're in the in-between space. The liminal realm, the void that exists between one way of being and another. And here's what you need to understand. Your psyche is protecting you. It's refusing to let you re-engage with motivations that were never truly yours to begin with. It won't let you go backward. But it hasn't yet revealed what will motivate you moving forward. This isn't laziness. This isn't failure. This isn't even stagnation. This is your soul taking a sacred pause before the next phase of your becoming. Let me tell you about Maya because her story will show you what this void actually looks like in a real life. Maya was a marketing executive. Brilliant, fast-tracked, always exceeding expectations. The kind of person everyone wanted on their team because she'd work 80 hours a week and never complain. Until she had a breakdown at 37 that forced her to look at why she could never say no, why disappointing anyone felt like actual death. She spent 2 years in intensive therapy, EMDR for the childhood wounds, inner child healing for the little girl who learned that love was conditional on being useful, parts work for the inner critic that never let her rest, shadow work for the rage she'd been suppressing since she was 7 years old. By the end of those 2 years, she was genuinely healed. The people-pleasing that had driven her for 3 decades was gone. The need for external validation had dissolved. The anxiety that used to wake her up at 3 in the morning gone. The fear of being alone transformed into genuine self-companionship. She thought this meant she'd go back to work energized. Better than before. Healthier, more balanced, but still driven. Instead, when she tried to return to her career, something felt wrong. Not bad wrong, empty wrong. The campaigns that used to excite her, that used to make her feel creative and alive, they felt meaningless. The client meetings that once energized her left her feeling hollow. The promotions she'd been chasing for years, the ones that used to represent success and validation, suddenly seemed like elaborate distractions from something she couldn't name. She told me, "I used to wake up every morning with fire in my belly. Even if it was anxiety, even if it was fear, even if it was this desperate need to prove I mattered, it was fuel. It got me out of bed. It made me feel purposeful. Now I wake up and feel nothing. Like I'm waiting for instructions from a voice that isn't speaking." What Maya discovered, and this is the key insight that changes everything, is that her motivation had never been hers. It was borrowed, inherited, downloaded from a childhood where the only way to feel safe was to be indispensable. She'd been motivated by one thing her entire adult life: not disappointing people, not being too much, not being abandoned for having needs. Every achievement, every late night, every sacrifice, it was all in service of one unconscious belief: if I'm useful enough, maybe I'll finally be loved. When therapy healed that wound, when she finally believed she was worthy of love, just for existing, the entire engine stopped. The fuel line was cut. And for the first time in her life, she had space to ask a question she'd never been allowed to ask. What do I actually want? She couldn't answer it. Not right away, because she'd never asked it before. She'd only ever asked, what do they want from me? What will make them approve of me? What do I need to do to be enough? So she sat in the void, unmotivated, confused, terrified that she'd somehow broken herself by healing. Now let me tell you about Ethan, because his void looked different but felt the same. Ethan was a high-level engineer, youngest person in his company to make senior architect. Driven, focused, never satisfied. He had a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, goals mapped out until retirement. Success wasn't optional, it was oxygen. Until therapy helped him see that every achievement was an attempt to earn something he'd never gotten his father's approval. His father was a mechanic, a good man, but emotionally unavailable. Never praised Ethan, never said he was proud, never showed up to a single school event or graduation or promotion. Ethan spent 40 years trying to achieve something big enough to finally get his father's attention. He processed the father wound in therapy, grieved the childhood he didn't have, made peace with never getting what he needed from a man who didn't have it to give. The healing was real, the pain lifted, but so did something else. He stopped caring about promotions, about being the best, about proving anything. His manager started asking if he was okay. His girlfriend wondered if he was depressed. He wasn't. He just felt flat, like someone turned off a switch he didn't know was powering his entire life. He told me, "I thought healing would make me better at my job, more present, less anxious. I didn't expect it to make me not care about my job at all." Ethan's entire identity had been built around achieving. Not because achievement mattered to him, not because he loved the work, but because achievement was the only language his father spoke. When the need for his father's approval dissolved through the healing journey, so did the motivation it powered. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't failing. His soul was finally refusing to perform for an audience that was never watching. Both Maya and Ethan were experiencing the same thing, the collapse of fear-based motivation. And they both made the same mistake at first. They tried to force the old motivation to return. They pushed themselves. They made lists. They set goals. They tried every productivity hack and motivational technique. Nothing worked, because you can't resurrect a system that was built on wounds. Once those wounds heal, the system dies, and no amount of forcing can bring it back. Fear is incredibly powerful fuel. It will get you up at 5 in the morning, keep you working until midnight, drive you to achieve things you never thought possible, push you beyond exhaustion, beyond burnout, beyond any reasonable limit. But fear-based motivation has an expiration date. Eventually, you either burn out or you heal enough to stop being afraid. And when the fear stops driving you, if you don't have anything else to take its place, you feel empty. That emptiness isn't the problem. It's the solution. Your psyche is creating space for something new to emerge. Something that doesn't require terror to function. Something that doesn't burn you out or leave you hollow. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Jung knew this. The answers aren't out there. They're not in the next goal or the next achievement or the next external validation. They're in here, in the silence, in the void, in the space where your true self has been waiting. But you can't hear it yet. Not while you're trying to force the old system to reboot. Not while you're treating the void like a problem to solve instead of a process to trust. Let me give you 3 signs that you're in fear-based motivation withdrawal, because recognizing this is the first step to letting it go. First, you can't force yourself to care about outcomes anymore. You used to obsess over results, whether you got the promotion, the approval, the recognition. Now you can see those things for what they are. External validation for a self you're no longer performing. The stakes feel lower because your sense of worth is no longer riding on them. Second, you feel guilty for not being more driven. You look at other people who seem motivated, who seem to know what they want, who seem to have their lives together, and you feel like something is wrong with you. Why can't you just push through? Why can't you just make yourself care? The guilt is actually the old system's last attempt to reactivate. It's trying to shame you back into performing. Third, you secretly miss the urgency. Even though the anxiety was killing you, even though the pressure was unsustainable, even though the fear was exhausting, it made everything feel important. It gave you a sense of purpose, even if that purpose was just survival. The calm you have now, it feels dangerous. Like you're falling behind. Like you're wasting your life. But that's not calm. That's your nervous system finally resting. This guilt, this fear, this sense that something is wrong because you're not driven, it's the last gasp of the old system trying to reactivate. Don't listen. Your soul knows better. You are in the void for a reason. Every transformation demands a temporary death of what came before. This is that death. And on the other side of it, if you let it complete, if you don't try to skip this phase or rush back into action before the transformation is finished, something real is waiting to be born. When new motivation emerges after Carl Jung individuation, it feels completely different. It's not anxious, not urgent, not driven by what you lack or what you're trying to prove or what you're afraid of losing. It's quiet, steady, undeniable, steady. It's like the difference between artificial light and sunlight. Both will help you see. But only one nourishes. Only one helps things grow. Only one is sustainable. Jung called this the emergence of the self with a capital S. Not the ego self that needs validation. Not the wounded self that hungers for approval. Not the performing self that constantly compares and competes and calculates its worth based on external measures. But the deeper self that's already whole. Already enough. Already connected to something larger than your individual survival. When the self begins to motivate you, everything changes. You don't hustle. You respond. You don't chase opportunities like a starving person grabbing at food. You recognize them like someone who knows they belong at the table. You don't force passion like you're trying to jumpstart a dead battery. You follow curiosity like you're following a thread that leads somewhere worth going. You don't create from emptiness, desperate to fill a void or prove your worth. You create from fullness because something inside you is so alive, it has to express itself. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Jung wrote this late in his life, after decades of watching people transform. He knew that authentic motivation only emerges when you stop trying to be someone else. When you stop performing for approval. When you finally let yourself want what you actually want. But authentic motivation starts small. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make grand entrances. It whispers, it nudges, it invites. And if your life is still full of noise, if you're still trying to force the old system to work, you'll miss it entirely. That's why I want to teach you how to recognize the 3 micro-indicators. These are the subtle signs that your true self is beginning to speak, that new motivation is starting to emerge from the void, that the silent period is coming to an end. The first micro-indicator is micro-curiosity. Authentic motivation starts as whispers of curiosity. Not, I should do this because it'll make me money. Or, I should want this because everyone else does. But genuine curiosity. I wonder what would happen if I'm strangely drawn to. This doesn't make sense, but something about it feels right. Maybe you find yourself drawn to a book you'd normally ignore, a conversation you'd usually avoid, a project that has no clear payoff or practical purpose. Maybe you start noticing things you never noticed before. Architecture, bird songs, the way light hits water. Things that don't serve any productive function but captivate your attention anyway. The recognition sign here is simple when you notice curiosity without pressure, without needing to justify it or turn it into a goal. That's the self speaking. That's your authentic motivation beginning to emerge. Most people miss this because they immediately try to make it useful. Okay, I'm curious about pottery, so maybe I should start a pottery business. No, just be curious. Just explore. Just follow the thread without needing to know where it leads. The second micro-indicator is micro-calming. Notice the things that make you feel subtly more settled. Not excited, not energized, not productive. Just right. Just peaceful. Just like you can finally breathe fully for the first time in years. It might be working with your hands, gardening, cooking without a recipe, building something. It might be being near water, or in forests, or in silence. It might be a specific kind of work you used to think was beneath you or unimportant. The recognition sign when something brings you peace for no logical reason, trust it. That's resonance, not logic. That's your nervous system telling you this is aligned with who you actually are. Your ego will try to dismiss these moments. That's a waste of time. That's not productive. That's not going to help you achieve anything. But your soul is saying something different. It's saying, this is real. This matters. This is what being alive actually feels like when you're not performing. The third micro-indicator is micro-resonance. You'll start feeling a subtle yes in your body when something is aligned. Not a thought, not a logical analysis, a sensation, a softening in your chest, a sense of expansion, a quiet rightness that you can't explain but can't deny. The self doesn't shout. It doesn't create urgency or crisis to get your attention. It hums. It vibrates at a frequency you can only feel when you're still enough to notice. Learn to feel that hum. Pay attention to what makes your body relax. What makes you feel more like yourself rather than more like the person you think you should be. What brings a sense of, yes, this, even when it makes no logical sense. This is how authentic motivation rebuilds itself. Not through grand revelations or sudden clarity, but through small moments of curiosity, calm, and resonance that you learn to trust and follow. Now I want to give you a practical exercise that helped both Maya and Ethan begin to discern between ego motivation and soul motivation, between the voice of fear and the voice of truth. It's called the two-list exercise, and it's simple but powerful. Get a piece of paper or open a document. You're going to make two lists. List 1, obligations disguised as desires. Write down everything you think you should want right now, everything you think you ought to pursue, everything you believe you need to care about to be successful, worthy, or enough. For each item on this list, ask yourself 3 questions. Whose voice is this, really? Who would be disappointed if I didn't care about this? If you're honest, whose approval am I trying to earn? What am I afraid will happen if I let this go? What disaster am I trying to prevent? What pain am I trying to avoid? What am I trying to prove by wanting this? Am I trying to show I'm smart enough, strong enough, worthy enough? Am I trying to earn love or respect or belonging? Be brutally honest. This list will show you how much of what you think you want is actually just fear, obligation, or performance. List 2. Attractions without justification. Now write down things you find yourself drawn to, even if they don't make logical sense. Things that spark curiosity. Things that make you feel more alive. Things that feel quietly right, even if you can't explain why. These might be small things. Walking without your phone, reading poetry, learning an instrument, having long conversations with strangers, working with your hands, being around children or animals or elderly people, creating things no one will ever see. For each item on this list, ask yourself 3 questions. What would it feel like to follow this pull without needing to justify it? What if I didn't need a reason? What if wanting it Was reason enough? What would it feel like to trust this attraction without understanding it completely? What if I didn't need to know where it leads or what it means? If I was allowed to want this just because I want it, what would I do first? What's one tiny step I could take today? The difference between these two lists is the difference between fear and truth. Between the wounded ego and your authentic self. Between motivation that exhausts you and motivation that nourishes you. List 2 might feel scary to follow. It might feel irresponsible or impractical or self-indulgent. That's how you know it's real. That's how you know it's coming from the part of you that's been silenced for decades. And here's one more question to sit with, one that might unsettle you in the best way. Who am I if I'm no longer proving anything? Don't rush to answer this. Let it unsettle you. Let it reveal the ways you've been building your identity around achievement, around external validation, around being enough for other people, instead of being true to yourself. Now let me give you 3 practical micro-practices that will help you navigate this transition period. These aren't productivity hacks. They're not optimization strategies. They're ways of teaching your nervous system that it's safe to stop performing and start becoming. Practice 1, the grieving ritual. Set aside 15 minutes 3 times a week. No phone, no distractions, no goal, just space to feel. Allow yourself to grieve who you thought you had to be. The version of you that worked so hard, that sacrificed so much, that carried so much weight, that did everything right but still felt empty. You can love that version of you and still let them go. You can honor what they did to keep you safe and still choose something different now. This isn't wallowing. This isn't dwelling on the past. This is completion. This is giving your psyche permission to release what's already gone. Practice 2, movement without agenda. 5 minutes outside every day. No tracking, no goals, no optimization. No, I'm doing this for my health, or I'm doing this to be productive. Just move your body because you have a body. Walk because walking feels good. Stand in sunlight because warmth is real. Feel the ground beneath your feet because you're alive and here. This teaches your nervous system that action doesn't have to be productive to matter. That existence doesn't need to be justified. That you can do something simply because it feels right. Practice 3, following micro-curiosities. When you feel even the smallest pull toward something, take one tiny step toward it. Not a commitment, not a plan, just a step. Read 1 page of the book, send 1 email, spend 10 minutes exploring, watch 1 video, have 1 conversation, create 1 small thing. The principle here is, this authentic motivation builds trust through small actions. You're showing your soul that you're finally listening. You're proving to your deeper self that it's safe to speak, that you'll actually follow through, that this time is different. As you practice these things, you'll start noticing signs that you're transitioning out of the void. Signs that the Negrito phase is completing. Signs that something new is being born. Your dreams will get weird, vivid, strange, symbolic. Your unconscious is reorganizing, processing, integrating. This is the psyche working at a level deeper than consciousness can reach. Childhood memories will resurface. Things you loved before you learned to perform, before the world told you who to be, before you started building your life around other people's expectations. Yourself is showing you who you were before the wounding, before the masks, before the persona took over. You might have moments where you think, I don't know who I am anymore. If you feel this, you're on exactly the right path. The old identity is dissolving. The new one hasn't fully formed. This isn't confusion, it's cocoon. Something is transforming in the darkness, and you can't see it yet because you're inside it. And you might start creating without pressure. Doodling, writing fragments, humming, making small things with no audience, no purpose, no need for them to be good or useful or impressive. When you create without needing applause, that's the self expressing itself. That's your authentic motivation, learning to breathe. We are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to become. Jung wrote this toward the end of his life, and it holds everything you need to understand about this process. You are not your wounds. You are not your compensations. You are not the version of yourself you built to survive your childhood, or please your parents, or fit into a world that couldn't hold all of you. You are what's emerging now. In the silence, in the void, in the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And that emergence, it's already happening, even when it feels like nothing is happening at all. Authentic motivation doesn't return like fireworks. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or sudden clarity or a blinding revelation that changes everything in an instant. It returns like dawn, so gradual you almost don't notice it's happening. Until suddenly the world is full of light and you can't remember exactly when the darkness ended. One day you'll realize you've been working on something for hours and didn't force yourself. You'll notice you made a choice that felt right without analyzing it to death or seeking approval or worrying about what people think. You'll recognize that the whisper you've been following has gotten slightly louder, slightly clearer, slightly more insistent. For Maya, the emergence started with children, not a logical career move, not something that made sense on paper, just a pull. After almost a year of feeling unmotivated, of sitting in the void, and wondering if she'd ever feel purposeful again, she started volunteering at an elementary school. Not because she had a plan, not because she was trying to figure out her next career move, just because something in her was curious. She spent one afternoon a week reading to second graders. No pressure, no performance, no need to be the best or prove anything. Just showing up and being present with kids who didn't care about her resume or her achievements or her past. And something strange happened. She felt alive again. Not anxious alive, not driven alive, not proving something alive, just alive. Present, real. She followed that feeling, started volunteering more, took a teaching certification course, made a third of what she used to make in marketing. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't performing. She was living. The work wasn't easy. It was actually harder than marketing in many ways. But it was hard in a way that felt right. Hard in a way that didn't drain her. Hard in a way that aligned with something deep inside her that she'd never been allowed to access before. For Ethan, the emergence started with an abandoned building. Something about its bones spoke to him. After months of feeling directionless, of wondering if he'd lost his edge, of sitting with the terrifying thought that maybe he'd never be driven again, he started taking walks. No destination, just walking. One day he noticed a building that had been abandoned for years. He'd driven past it thousands of times without seeing it. But that day, something about its structure, its potential, its dignity despite being forgotten, something caught him. He started sketching it. Not architectural plans, not blueprints for renovation, just impressions. What the building felt like, what it wanted to become, what story it was trying to tell. This wasn't driven by career goals or financial incentives. It wasn't motivated by proving his worth or impressing anyone or building his portfolio. It was motivated by something else entirely. By curiosity, by beauty, by a sense of rightness he couldn't explain but didn't need to. He spent weeks just drawing, just sitting, just being present with his structure. Nobody else seemed to notice. And slowly, gently, without any force or urgency, an idea began to emerge. That curiosity led to conversations with the building's owner. Those conversations led to a unique restoration project that honored the building's history while creating space for new life. That project led to a new direction in his career, one that felt aligned with who he was becoming rather than who he'd been. Neither Maya nor Ethan would have found their path if they'd forced the old motivation to return. If they'd pushed through the void, ignored the silence, gone back to their old way of working, they would have missed the whisper entirely. Maya would have continued designing campaigns that looked impressive but felt empty. Ethan would have continued designing buildings that proved his worth but starved his soul. The void was necessary. The silence was sacred. The loss of motivation wasn't the problem. It was the solution. When you're motivated by the self instead of the ego, everything transforms. Work becomes devotion, not obligation. You show up not because you have to, not because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't, but because something in you wants to show up. Because the work itself is calling you. Relationships become conscious choice, not unconscious need. You're with people because you choose them, not because you need them to complete you or validate you or fill a hole inside you that you're afraid to feel. Creativity becomes expression, not performance. You create because beauty is moving through you, because you have something to say, because making things is part of who you are, not because you need views or validation or proof that you're talented enough. Rest becomes nourishment, not laziness. You can finally let yourself be still without guilt, without the nagging sense that you're falling behind, without the fear that rest means you're not worthy. Boundaries become self-care, not selfishness. You can say no without drowning in guilt, without needing to justify yourself, without betraying some part of you that learned love was conditional on being endlessly available. And here's the paradox that would have shocked your old self, but this gentler motivation often accomplishes more than the frantic energy that came before. Why? Because it's sustainable. Because it's aligned with who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. Because it's coming from fullness rather than emptiness. From love rather than fear. From truth rather than compulsion. Jung talked about living symbolically, not in fantasy or delusion or spiritual bypassing, but in conscious connection to the deeper patterns, the meaningful coincidences, the synchronicities that reveal how your individual story fits into the larger story of existence. When you're living from the self, you start noticing these patterns. The right conversation happens at the right time. The opportunity you need appears exactly when you're ready for it. The people who can help you show up without you even asking. This isn't magical thinking. It's what happens when you stop forcing life to conform to your ego's agenda and start flowing with what wants to happen through you. Your healing isn't just for you. Your journey through the void isn't just about your personal transformation. Your emergence from the darkness serves something bigger than your individual comfort. Every person who completes this process, who faces their shadow and sits in the void and emerges with authentic motivation, and they become a light for others. They become proof that the journey is possible. They become permission for others to stop performing. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Not becoming special or separate or superior, but becoming specific, becoming uniquely yourself, becoming the irreplaceable individual you were always meant to be. And that process, that completion, it ripples outward. It changes families. It shifts workplaces. It transforms relationships. It gives others permission to stop performing and start becoming. We are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to become. You didn't choose your wounds. You didn't choose the survival mechanisms you had to develop. You didn't choose the persona you built to stay safe in a world that couldn't hold all of you. But you are choosing what happens next. You're choosing to sit in the void instead of running from it. You're choosing to trust the dissolution instead of forcing resurrection of the old self. You're choosing to wait for real motivation instead of manufacturing fake urgency. That choice, that's the transformation. That's the rebirth. That's the completion of the spiritual awakening you started when you first decided to face your shadow. You didn't lose your motivation. You lost the illusion of who you thought you needed to be. The silence you've been afraid of. That's where your true self has been waiting to speak. That's where your authentic desires have been hibernating. That's where the life you're actually meant to live has been gestating in the darkness. The emptiness you've been trying to fill. That's not emptiness. That's space being created for something more real, more sustainable, more genuinely you than anything you've experienced before. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are not wasting your life or falling apart or doing this wrong. You are exactly where you need to be for the next phase of your becoming to begin. And when it does begin, when that quiet hum of authentic motivation starts to emerge, when you look back on this void period from the other side, you'll understand why the silence was so necessary. You'll see why the old system had to die completely before the new one could be born. You'll realize that losing your old motivation wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a gift to be received. The gift of finally being free. Free from fear-based striving. Free from borrowed dreams. Free from performing for audiences that were never actually watching. Free to discover what you're really here for. Free to become who you actually are. Free to live from truth instead of compulsion. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Jung wrote this, and it's the key to everything you've been experiencing. You made the unconscious conscious. You faced the Carl Jung shadow. You saw the machinery. You recognized the performance. You understood the compensations. You completed the Jung shadow integration that most people avoid their entire lives. And now you're in the space between fate and choice. Between living the life your wounds designed for you and living the life your soul is calling you toward. The void isn't the end of your story. It's the comma between the life you've been living and the life you're meant to live. Your soul just stopped performing. And that's not the tragedy. That's the liberation. The life waiting on the other side of this silence, it's worth every moment of not knowing. Because it's real. Because it's yours. Because it's finally true. If this resonated with something deep in you, if it helped you name what you've been experiencing, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Your story, your journey through this void, might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to know they're not alone in this. And if you want to continue exploring these deeper currents of psychology and soul, if you're drawn to understanding what it really means to complete the Carl Jung individuation process and step into authentic living, make sure to subscribe. Because this conversation about shadow work and transformation, about what it means to become who we truly are, this is just the beginning. The void isn't the end. It's the threshold, and you're already crossing it.